making films since the 1930s, but it was 40 years ago that they made their first horror film, The Curse of Frankenstein.
The bat, this one, as you can see, unfortunately, like me, he's deteriorating because latex doesn't last for 40 years. It's the only bat left from The Kiss of the Vampire. I made 20 of these, and obviously we had them on wires, and very crudely. I mean, nowadays with computers, everything can be done with as much wire and poles as you want, but here was floor effects in the raw. And these would shoot down wires like a catapult. And then the actor would react, you see, and then this would flap, and he would fall onto the ground, and then we would cut.
Well, John Trevelyan, as you know, was the British censor. He was a very, very nice man, a rather unusual man to be a censor. And we used to watch films together, and he would hold my hand and squeeze it every time there was a problem shot. So by the end of the viewing, I would know how many problem shots there were.
The extraterrestrials in Hammer's hugely successful Quatermass films of the 1950s didn't just bring death and destruction. They also provided Hammer with the money to start making the films they are now most famous for.
What is it?
It's the one thing that may save us and humanity.
Oh, come on, tell us about you being a vampire lover.
I killed them all off. It was funny because of all the things that happened, like my fangs always falling into Kay Damara's cleavage, and the whole crew always wanted to come and retrieve them, and I said, no, it's for me to do this. I'm nearer. And I'd pick them out very daintily, and there she was, going like this, and I thought, what is she doing? And I could see she was laughing. I said, stop it, or I kill you. And she stopped it. And I glued them back in again with the cameraman's chewing gum.
They always felt that they should have a glamorous girl in their films, and they did.
Hammer surely was glamour, but, and maybe I was glamorous.
You were, definitely.
Well, thank you.
You were so gorgeous.
I mean, the way she's built, when she looks down, she won't be able to see a little handle.
Well, that's ridiculous. I can see it from here. That's because you're looking down a crack in the middle.
Hammer is not normally associated with humor, but one of the most successful Hammer films ever was On the Buses, which became the biggest grossing British film of 1971.
It was an idea of James Carreras who owned Hammer. It was a very successful TV series. And he said, let's make a film. He said, Skeggs, do a budget. I want it under 100,000. I did a budget for 90,000. He said, that's wonderful. You're going to produce it. I said, I'm not. I can't stand the series. He said, produce it or go. I produced it.
Here, hang on to me, Clobber, will you? I don't want to go in there with my equipment.
There's not much point in going in there without it.
Yeah. What's the matter, jealous, eh?
Oi, don't be too long, otherwise you won't have the strength to turn your little handle.
They relied more on the imagination, that's the thing. I think today, it's overdone on If we relied more on imagination, what we don't see is more effective than the actual event. The idea was that the audience should never be conscious of the camera. Now it seems that filmmakers go out of their way to make the audience conscious of the camera.
Blood from the Mummy's Tomb was definitely jinxed. I started filming with Peter Cushing playing my father. But after the first day of shooting had ended, we heard his wife had got terribly ill and was rushed to hospital, and he asked to be withdrawn from the film. So it was jinxed from the start. But it wasn't just that. It was towards the end of shooting that the director, Seth Holt, he had hiccups for a week, and we'd sit in on rushes, and he'd be going, and we'd think it was very, very funny, but sadly, after a week, he just dropped dead.
Let me kiss you.
As a vampire, of course, Christopher went into it totally and utterly with all his passion, and he has a lot of that. The victims think it's all terribly sexy, and they get all into a hyperbole, into this incredible state when they see Christopher coming slowly towards them, and they go into this sense of ecstasy. And they think in orgasmic terms until it all happens and it hurts.
Since the death of Jonathan Harker, Count Dracula, the propagator of this unspeakable evil, has disappeared. He must be found and destroyed.
Peter was like a knight. I mean, he was. I think he will go down, obviously, as the #1 legend of Hammer movies, closely followed, obviously, by Christopher.
It was my will.
And Christopher was the very solid, central, serious core of Hammer movies, and the way he played Dracula was simply, it broke all the molds. I think he made Dracula far better than people talk of Bela Lugosi, but I do think that Christopher made Dracula far more interesting and far more ambivalent and strange than anybody else.
Mr. Harker, I'm glad that you've arrived safely.
Well, very often the title of a film gives me an idea for a basic theme. And in the instance of Dracula, it was simply the name Dracula that gave me the idea. And from that, the theme came.
1930s, the future founder of Hammer Films, William Hines, was part of a variety double act called Hammer and Smith, named after the borough they first performed in.
When you got a cameraman like Jack Asher or Michael Reed, you had two of the finest colour cameramen in our profession. And it was the quality of their pictures that I think, and their colour work, that made the films so wonderful to watch and wonderful to see. And that quality is still there in the reprints now. It's absolutely beautiful.
When you see Hammer films, they look incredible. We use the best art directors, the best designers, the best cameramen. The technicians were always top rate. And you can see it by looking at the films. The quality is incredible. And it was all done on a shoestring.
I think most of the British critics thought the Hammer films were commercial dross. And then gradually over the years, the National Film Theatre would produce seasons of them, and we got a shock when we saw them again. Not all of them were good, but the general run of Hammer films were actually very well produced, and they were in a kind of a commercial format which worked. They were obviously not made for a huge amount of money, and they didn't actually have a great deal of luxury to them, but they knew what they were doing in that genre, and we suddenly realized that we'd been mistaking these films all along and that they stand up extraordinarily well.
On the first Dracula, when Peter Cushing opens up the curtains and the shaft of light comes through, to my amazement, a sheet of glass got put in front of the camera, and Jack Asher, with a very faint pencil, marked the source of the light and made a template, and the standby painter sprayed very, very lightly with the white paint. There would be a light, a lamp on the floor, and at the moment that the curtains were pulled aside, the light was switched on, and lo and behold, it was this beam of light. It was very effective. I was amazed because it all happened in the space of 10 minutes.
Favourite piece of Hammer trivia. Lust for a Vampire starred a woman called Jutta Stensgaard, who was from Denmark. These days she lives in a religious community in the States. She's a born-again Christian and flatly refuses to talk about anything in her past. Possibly that's because of the lesbian love scenes in Lust for a Vampire, or it could just be because of her 6 months that she spent with Bob Monkhouse on The Golden Shot in the early 70s.
The unsung hero of Hammer is Michael Ripper, who has appeared in more Hammer films than any other actor.
I thought you were amazing in Scars of Dracula.
Scars of Dracula.
You played a landlord.
Oh, in the pub.
Very intense, in the pub.
Yes.
And your eyes were all I remember from that film, really, after a few years.
I was always much better in a pub. than anywhere else.
You were more in your element.
I had so many good things to do. Tony Hines, who was the man who ran those films, he would give me anything that was not like me, knowing that I would
make it.
Exactly.
That's my glasses. What's happened to them, I say? Where are they? Oh dear. Oh. Oh, what a terrible thing to do.
When people went to see Hammer films in the 50s and the 60s, they would get up out of their seats and say, "Where's Michael Ripper?" They would ask for you. Did you know that?
No.
You didn't know that?
No, I might have been there if I had.
I know. Yeah.
Excuse me, Alan.
I think I like to play a vampire because it's not true. You're not a real killer. You're a fantasy killer. She is sensuous in her movements, and she is powerful and strong and passionate. She's just something that your fantasy can run riot with. I didn't really know a lot about vampires. What I did was mostly instinctive.
A Hammer film has to be thrilling. It has to be frightening. Remember, it's always a kind of morality tale, a struggle between good and evil, and good has to win in the end. There is the Hammer product, you know, which is that it's set sometime in the last century. Hammers need horses and coaches and costume and so on. At the end, it's always somebody who inspires the downtrodden masses to rise up against the aristocrats living in the castle and burning the castle down. During the 60s, there was this whole feeling of sexual liberation. And at the end of the 60s, the censorship was more or less done away with. So we came into the 70s with the ability to push out the boundaries of sex both on the stage and on screen and everywhere else. And this is just what people did. The Carmilla story, which had strong undertones of lesbianism, allowed us both to put in pretty girls nude and indulge in some lesbian sins, you know. And so that was